Welcome to Neon Cobra. Let's kick into it. Final week of my project management series, and the closing phase is where we're going to land conveniently. So what we're going to look at this week is how to successfully close a project. Now, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this, but often it's probably the area that has the most shortcuts, right? So let's talk about this. You're going to collect your final list of concerns from your client, and you're going to set your goal line. Your goal line, where the project ends. And this is very important, right? What we'll find a lot of times, especially for smaller SMBs and small MSPs, is the project team is also the service team. So there's this blend of, what's a project and what's going into the help desk and support side. You really want to try to delineate that as much as possible. On paper or, high level, it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. Like if you're the service technician also doing the project, why not just do it both? But from a project profitability standpoint, which is going to be very important, we'll talk about, having the exact quantity of labor it takes to do a job is important to ensure that you are very competitive in the market you are playing in. And depending on how aggressive things are, this can make the difference between a lost sale and a new client. So you want to grab that list as you're hitting and you finished all your project items, the project objectives, as you're clearing those out, and you've got the server migrated, everything's been shut down, things are cleaned up, then you ask the client, we've got 5 days to report any problems in this environment. You need to tell me exactly what is wrong, what you would like addressed. We want to make it clear, we're not going to ignore anything beyond this point, but this is the objectives you're going to set, and it creates a delineation for the client. And then the agreement is upon addressing those issues in some capacity where they're completely closing them out or acknowledging their issues, you are going to move them to a project closure and signature, right? This is where you're going to get your CSAT scores, your feedback and everything. Now, we're getting a little bit ahead here. Before you do that, you collect your list, and then you need to go out and you need to gather all the documentation you grabbed in your auditing phase, right? You need to make sure they are in your systems. You need to make sure that it is accessible and updated, and then you need to retire out your old documentation. Nothing is worse than a year and a half down the road, a brand new service tech is following process and going through your best practices to find out they're following a documentation for a piece of equipment that doesn't exist there anymore. They're looking for IP addresses. You've got RMM agents that are dead in the water, but you're still paying for. You can't pass those costs on to your clients, both productivity and actual tool loss. You need to go through and clean up. And it seems, no one likes to clean up, but this is where you could hemorrhage a lot of money if you're not paying attention. And it's sunk costs you will never know about till years later sometimes, where you're just hemorrhaging hours fixing problems on stuff that doesn't exist anymore. Another very important thing, and this is where you kind of find the maturity level of an MSP really start to evolve. Lessons learned, right? Often skipped because you just want to get them back in. And yeah, I totally learned this lesson. Don't worry. You need to get together with your project team and the client and have a debrief session. Here's what we did. Here's what we scoped. Here's problems we had. We would like to hear insight from everybody. It doesn't need to be a very big session. It can be done as part of your signature or your sign off, right? But the idea is you spend the time documenting this information. And now with tools like Copilot or even Teams Premium, you can just record those sessions remotely and get an action item or a list outside of that. This will be very useful after when the project manager and the project team is going through the review process internally to find out, what are some things we could have avoided for. One thing to understand as MSPs, projects in theory are considered isolated engagements, as in it's a one-off. That's really the definition of a project, a one-off, non-iterative task within the organization. But you can't treat that as an MSP. As an MSP, projects is your lifeblood, right? That's how you bring in new clients. That's how you bring in new work. That's how you bring in new money. So what you're going to see a lot of times is, if you don't iterate and improve your project process and you don't iterate and improve how you're doing your project in general, you're going to stagnate and you're going to lose a competitive edge in the market, right? If you don't take your learnings from a project, like, hey, we underscoped this one. It took 20 more hours than expected. And then you lost money on that one. Okay, that's fine. But on the other side, if you're like saying, okay, this takes 50 hours to do and it only took you 10, on paper, oh, great. We've made 40 hours of extra labor. That's fantastic. But then when you're quoting the next project with the same amount of labor and you're running into competition that has an iterative and improved process, they're coming in like $6,000-$7,000 cheaper, right? And then that's where they're able to get either more margin if they want to, or scoop the business from you. Another thing is understanding where your problems or even what took a lot of time is an opportunity to identify tools for improvement, right? Let's take an example of an AVD, a virtual desktop deployment, right? 50, 60 users need to go up and you're manually creating your host pools. You're trying to get your golden images up. You spent 15 hours trying to get your FS logics working. In the end, client didn't know any better, but your company spent hours after hours trying to get a host pool up and running. And then you take that and you look at a product like, say, Nerdio Manager that would have automated and saved you 18, 20, 30 hours on deployment, right? While it might be too late for that project, knowing that this is where you're going to take your company and say, hey, I could be saving 18 to 20 hours on every one of my projects by just adopting this tool. That is a huge savings, right? And there are certain projects where you can't do them realistically and competitively without tools, like a mailbox migration, right? There are certain tools that just make your lives way easier, profile migration tools. So go through, take a look at your buckets, your project tickets, and say like, wait, this one took 60 hours, why? And you should probably already know if you did your auditing and you did your lessons learned, and then maybe task outside of the project a tool to fix that, right? Auditing and closing, like I mentioned, often overlooked, but that's where your service provider, your MSP, goes from good to great, right? That is where you distinguish yourself. And company size does not change this. You could have a one-man shop, a one-woman shop that does this. And as long as they are paying attention and learning from their project, that is productive growth. You need to do this. Anyways, thank you so much. I hope this project series was worth its while. If you have any follow-up questions or anything to add to this, I would really love to hear back from anyone actively running projects. Albeit it's been maybe 3 years since I've gone. I don't think there's been too much changes to how things are done. Obviously, tools fix things, but I would love to hear any sort of insight from maybe recent projects you've run, things you might have learned, and let's see if we can share it among the community. Take care.